Welcome to Humble Beginnings, a podcast where we uncover the unconventional, more relatable paths to success. In this show, we'll share the stories before the C-suites, board memberships, and appointments, the stories of various upbringings, first jobs, career pivots, educational uncertainties, and more. This is the place to hear about their lives from the GovCon executives themselves. We hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Humble Beginnings. I'm your host, Amanda Ziede, and our guest today is John Ustica, President and CEO of Siemens Government Technologies. Thank you for being here today, John.
Well, thank you, Amanda. I'm really excited to be here and to get a chance to speak with you.
Of course, me too. So, John, I want to start with your upbringing in Fort Myers, Florida. I understand that you didn't have the most conventional childhood and spent a bit of time in and out of hospitals. So tell us a bit about what you were going through as a child and its impact on you.
Yeah, I think as we was thinking about having this discussion, it's like, where do you start the story of me and my career? And I think my story actually starts on a soccer field. So I played soccer when I was little, and when I was in first grade, in around a few weeks before Thanksgiving, was playing soccer, and in the middle of the game, just really collapsed in the middle of the field and in an extraordinary amount of pain in my abdomen. I remember my dad took me to the hospital, and like if you ever had severe pain in the abdomen, the first thing they believe is they look at your appendix. So they rushed me in. His appendix must have burst, took it out and said, well, actually, there's nothing wrong. But they noticed that a lot of my organs were not where they were supposed to be. And so that was a little bit of a scary time. And at that point, I got transferred to a larger hospital. And after several days later, they realized that I had what was called a Wilms tumor on one of my kidneys, which I was 6, and the tumor was about the size of some doctors said football, some said volleyball, but let's just say it was big. And
Wow.
And so that there kicked off what was quite a long time being in and out of hospitals. So I spent the better part of first and second grade in and out of hospitals, had several surgeries, 65 weeks of chemotherapy that went along with it, but fully recovered. As you think about leadership and transition, what that was, it was the first hurdle that I had to overcome in my life there. I actually went to about 10 years of checkups because if you also know what was going on based on my age, it was in 1985, 86. I had to have blood transfusions. There was a lot of fear of, HIV and things like that. So I had a lot of follow-up afterwards. And I think I actually had follow-up at Shands in Gainesville until I was like 16. Then they finally said, you're totally clear. So I have one kidney, and really it was something that changed. And the other thing that it did prevent me from doing it was I couldn't really play contact sports. About all I could play was tennis and track. Luckily, though, being in Fort Myers, Florida, I took pretty quickly into fishing and boating. So for the folks that have met me, they know me that's a big piece of my life. My dad always joked that you could either be a golfer or a boater, and he was a golfer, and so I decided I would do something else. But Fort Myers was a small town. It's not like it is today at all. It was very beautiful. Our experience of the seasons was quite different than we have in the DC area, but it was really fun. And I think that it taught me a lot about overcoming, adversity and also learning about being positive. That when you're 6 years old and you're going through these things and the doctor comes in and says, we're going to give you a couple shots, but then it's going to be okay. And we're going to give you this and it's going to be okay. And, we're going to give you this medicine. You're going to you'll be very calm for the next few days while you take chemotherapy and everything's going to be okay. And it was okay. And I think that really, if you look at the power of positive thinking, I learned that at a really young age. Once I had children, I kind of realized more what my parents were actually going through. So it humbled me pretty significantly when my first child was born and understanding, okay, now I have a child and what it must have been like for them. So yeah, it was a lot.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine going through that as an adult, let alone a child. And, like you said, you learned so much and so many things at such an early age. I'm sure it changed your perspective a bit growing up. So thank you for sharing that with us. And John, I know you said that up until you were 16, you were still, in and out of checkups, but what was your family and school life like during this time?
I wouldn't say that my school and family life wasn't terribly different. I started in public school in 7th grade. I changed to a Lutheran private school. So I moved to a very small school. I had 25 kids in my class in 7th and 8th grade, and then went to a Catholic high school, Bishop Verot in Fort Myers, Florida. And at that time, I think we had about 100 people in my high school class. It was still pretty small. So I kind of knew everybody, had a very middle class, what I would call upbringing. My dad was a CPA. He had his own practice for most of his life. So he didn't, unlike like I do. He didn't really ever work for a big company. The other thing was my family had several companies besides, him being a CPA. So we had a water utility where we had 800 customers that we provided water to, and we also had a transmission business and so probably from the time I was like 14, I worked some way, shape, or form after school, in some of those business. My dad had to do a rate case every year through the Public Service Commission in Florida, and so I'd help him do that, developing the water rates and sending notifications to the customers and stuff. So for me, it was sort of normal. And like I said, I couldn't play a whole lot of sports. So I did play tennis. And then I ended up really loving the water. So I did a whole lot of fishing. I used to fish, competitively, I would say, in tournaments. Most people would come with their car and truck with their boat on a trailer. We had to come by boat because we were old enough to drive a car. So we started doing that. And I did quite a bit of sailing as well. So just a lot of stuff related to the water. So it was, again, it's where we were. So if you're in the mountains, you go backpacking. Where we were, there wasn't much else to do. So that's what we did.
Interesting. Do you think your interests kind of pivoted since you couldn't do contact sports? Was this kind of like something you didn't know you would get into, and you fell into it because it was one of those activities that you were able to do?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of that. I sort of skirted it with Little League because it didn't have a physical exam. But as soon as I got to be towards high school age, then they required a physical exam, and the doctors at that time would say, this is not worth the risk. Which was difficult. I have a younger sister and a younger brother, and they could do a lot more than I did. I was also an Eagle Scout, a Boy Scout, so I did a lot there. I was able to go to Philmont and do that, and I think that helped grow the sense of organization and community, and really sort of kept me grounded. I would say I was not in a lot of trouble as a kid, so it's probably why I ended up working in GovCon, where we have a lot of compliance and rules. I was sort of not a rule breaker, but I really had a great childhood, and it's, I think, shaped me in the way that I am fairly laid back, in the way that I operate sometimes, and that I think provides a sense of calm in the storm sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about high school and your academic interests. What were you into in high school, and how did that kind of lead its way into what you studied in college?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So I love helping and taking care of people, and I did that from a very young age. And I had this great dream that I was going to be a physical therapist. I really wanted to do it. Really wanted to help folks. I volunteered in high school, at the hospital helping, and I was I was busy all the time. I mean, that was my high school. I was always moving, always running around doing something. But one of that was, I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my career. So I got introduced to a few really, cool things by that, in terms of really being able to do the things before I had to go to college and try to do it, which we'll get to that story in a second. But I would say the other things in high school that I did some fun things. Like we had this Model United Nations, which I thought was really fun, which, probably at the time people thought was nerdy. But it was one of the things that was very interesting about my school career is that a lot of folks, sort of peak in high school with their grades, and then they find college and grad school and everything harder. I actually did the opposite. So I had better grades in undergraduate than I did in high school, and better grades in my graduate school than I did in undergraduate. So as I got more and more into the higher education piece, I liked it better. So I learned very early on that if I get bored at something, I don't do good at paying attention. So it's kind of funny. Like my lowest grade in college was in theater survey. So that just goes to show, kind of how my brain operates, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense to me. I don't know. And for the record, I think a lot of things that were nerdy when we were in high school today would not be nerdy. I think
I know.
kids find these things cool now, and I'm jealous. So, what eventually led you to studying business at the University of Central Florida?
Yeah. So what happened to me is, like I said, I really wanted to be a physical therapist. The best program in the state of Florida for that was, at the University of Miami. So I started my freshman year at University of Miami, in 1997. Lived in this old Pearson dorm because in Miami you had to live on campus as a freshman. It was an awesome experience. And I will tell you, I never worked so hard in my life, as I did for B minuses in Biology 101. Chemistry was easy because it was math. All the other intro classes were fairly, except for calculus was a little bit difficult for me, but I got through it with good grades. So I got my first set of grades, which was not were not good. So I had to really have this big thinking time over Christmas, my freshman year, and went back and said, well, I got to do something different because this is like it was torture. I mean, really, like I had no life. I was in the library all the time and just was not surviving. So I learned two things in that. Number one is so one of the interesting things about Miami was they had advisors who lived in the dorm. So like they would move in with their family for a year, and they would kind of be the advisor. So I actually went and saw, the guy in my building, and I said, I explained the situation, and he said, well, sounds like you need help. And I said, well, that's why I'm here. And he said, well, what do you really like? And I said, well, I don't know. I like math, and my family's all in business. He said, well, okay, why don't you sign up for a business class, and because you can drop it after the first couple classes and see if you like it. So here I am, a guy who doesn't have great grades, who's now saying, well, I don't want to take 15 hours I want to take 18, and I want to add in an economics class. Well, the end of that story is I got the highest grade in the economics class, with very little, what I would call to be very little effort. And I saw all these other folks, around me struggling in biology and really getting weeded out for pre-med. And I was like, I don't know that I can do that for another 3 years of undergrad and then another 3 years of graduate school. And so I went and looked at it and said, okay, Miami is a private university, which is at the time extremely expensive. And I think I'm going to switch to business. And so I reactivated my acceptance to UCF and then ended up there and then had just a really amazing 3 years. And I still have so many friends from there. And to watch what's happened with the school is just awesome. And, finished out. And it hit me with my junior year. There's an introductory to finance class. And it's sort of like okay, we're going to weed you out of business if this is not just for you class. And I saw all these people around me struggling. And I was like, yeah, I've already been through that. And so you really got to decide. And again, for me, it was really easy. I should say the most interesting thing that happened to me at UCF was at some point in I think it was my sophomore year, I had to take managerial accounting, second semester of my sophomore year. And they said, I was talking to the advisor about signing up for classes. Like, we have this new teacher. He's a little bit unorthodox. As it turns out, he had just retired as a CFO of Montgomery Ward. Now, younger people are not going to know what Montgomery Ward is, but some of us do. His wife was an executive for Disney, and pretty much he signed up to teach class at UCF because he was bored. But it was an amazing class because he was bringing a real business perspective to the academia, and it was like by far the best. And it was, one of these. And again, being the best person in a class was not normal for me, but that was another one where he said, hey, the best score in the class coming into the final doesn't have to take the final. And we're sitting there one day, and he looks at me, and he's like, John, you don't have to come back because you got 100% on the final because you got the best grade, which I was like shocked. So I learned two things that I learned in college was, number one, if I went in the first day and the professor said, you can show up here or not, just read the book and the test is all going to be out the book, I dropped the class immediately. Because I knew that learning from a book and learning from, studying and not having the context is just not how I learn. So I went to class all the time. Like, I was not one of those. I made sure I was at class every time. I made sure I was at the lab sessions and spent time with the teachers and the assistants. Just really learned that if I had that relationship, I would be able to, even if I screwed up a test or messed up a paper, I could recover because I had the relationship with the teacher and they were willing to help. And they appreciated the fact that there was, some kids out there who were willing to help. And then, I had an internship working for what's now today called Scottrade. And at that time it was a brokerage. And, that was around the time of the dot-com bubble and all those other things. So I got to see a lot of very interesting stuff in college. So it was great.
Yeah, it does seem like an interesting time for business, a little bit different than today, but
Yeah.
was it hard for you to make that transition from a path that you thought you really wanted to business? I know that you love taking care of people, and that was a passion of yours. And as a leader, you take care of people in other ways. But at the time, was that a challenge?
It was a huge challenge. That was the first time in my life I think I really felt like a failure. I had to make some pretty big decisions. I sat down with my parents and said, I just don't think spending all this money to go to Miami and what it's doing for you, for me to come with a business degree, makes sense. But for me, it's a sense of failure. And I think what my parents said to me was, well, okay, just don't mess it up. And so I guess that kind of drove me to do it. On the other side of it, I think, in business and especially with, running a company, there's times where you can throw everything you have at it, but you have to say, hey, this is maybe not the right path. And so I think it also taught me early to be pretty humble about changing the path because it's maybe the right thing to do. And it's certainly for me, you know, turned out great. I mean, in terms of, being able now to lead an organization and all the things that Siemens provided, that was, if I had said, no, I'm going to slug through it and be a physical therapist, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. Not, and it's not to me, my life wouldn't have been fulfilled, but it certainly was a different path.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It is kind of crazy thinking back of the decisions we had to make at 18, 19 years old. It feels so young now. So those are big life decisions, kind of.
Yeah.
So tell us about your very first job after college. How did you land in energy?
Yeah. Yeah, actually a very funny story around what industry I'm in today. So I really had two kinds of job offers. One was from Lockheed Martin to do government accounting, and one was with Siemens Energy. And at the time, Siemens Energy was still in the midst of what was called the gas turbine boom. So if you remember Enron and all that time, California having brownouts, it was like hog wild. And they're like, we just need people. And I remember, was talking to my dad, and he's like, okay, you're graduating, in 2 months, and you haven't got a job. And it was kind of funny. A lot of folks I know had gone into consulting, and they had gotten like pre-offers from some of these consulting. I wasn't so sure about that because I thought it was a little too good to be true. And interesting enough, like half of the folks I knew got their offers rescinded before they started. So my gut was maybe right. But I had this great offer from Siemens. They're like, we do stuff all over the world, and we build power. And I mean, there was literally across the street from UCF. I didn't even know what they did or that it was even really there. So I knew about Lockheed, obviously, because I had some friends who were older who worked there. And I decided, and I didn't think government accounting was the right thing for me at the time. So I started in procurement with Siemens. And I mean, the interesting thing was, I always thought if I became a manager at Siemens, it would be like the best thing ever. And, then I remember sitting with one of my early mentors. Her name is Cheryl Bodiford. And she was, saying to me, well, like, what is your goal? And I was like, I want to be a manager. She's like, well, when are you going to do it? And I was like, I don't know. It's one day. And she's like, well, I did it like at 27, and that's pretty young around here. So I was like, okay, that sounds like a good goal. And at 27, I got my first job to be a manager. And then I was like, well, I've made it. This is great. Like I'm set for life. I'm a manager in a corporation. And then, 18 months later, they asked me to go move into manufacturing and be the controller of a plant. And I was like, that's it. I made it. It's great. And then 2 years later, it's like, would you like to move to Germany and do this at a larger scale and learn another language and do all that? And I think that's the biggest thing about in growing my career is, I was always never afraid to say no. The interesting thing about that job I got when I was 27 is I'm pretty sure like 8 people turned it down before I said yes. So I think I was pretty much like the only person left to ask, because obviously I didn't have that much experience. But they were like, look, we just need somebody who can jump in and get their hands dirty. And so I was like, I'll try. I can't promise you that it's going to be great because I don't. They said, well, it's interesting to go to a job offer. They're like, well, the business is in a turnaround mode and we're not really sure what's going on, but the auditors aren't happy and these people aren't happy. But here, we really want you to go do this. So, okay, well, but again, it's about having leaders and mentors. I went at the time to meet with the CFO of the company, and he goes, how old are you? And I said, well, I just turned 27. He says, you're 27. It's like the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you got to come back here with your tail between your legs at 28 and you start over. He's like, that's the worst thing that can happen. He said, so what do you have to lose? And also remember, we're sending you there. So we don't want you to fail. We're not sending you there to fail. We're sending you there to succeed. And you got a lot of folks here who want you to succeed. So he's like, go kick butt. And then, and then of course he told me some other things like make sure the partner from, KPMG stops calling me about this business. And he's like, then you'll be successful. And obviously I was in internal audit at the time. So I knew all the people. And so I went and met with them and they told me what to go do. And of course I did it in like 60 days. And I think, that was a big learning for me around just listening. Like, okay, I understand. We can solve it. And then Siemens gave me so many opportunities, to move around and to get these jobs. And then if I look at how I got, the job moving to Germany, that one I really pushed to happen because I really wanted to live abroad. I wanted to see the culture. But the other ones, sort of happened. I don't want to say out of chance, but just kind of being there and doing a good job. I mean, when I know it's very, very, very interesting. So that's the coolest part, and I think the great part about Siemens is that's why I've been here 23 years, is because they do all these things.
I don't think I realized earlier on that you had been with Siemens since the beginning of your career. So, where else did Siemens take you before, obviously, where you are today?
Yeah, so I as I said, they asked me in 2006 to move to Atlanta or to Alpharetta, which was supposed to be a 1 year assignment. It's 2023. I haven't been back to Orlando since. Um, After that, there we had a manufacturing plant in Fort Payne, Alabama, which is for the people in our sector about an hour and 15 minutes east of Huntsville, almost due east. If you drive from Atlanta to Huntsville, you would go through there. It's not known for very much, but we built a plant there in the early 1980s, and we built generator components there. We did a full automation of that plant. Basically, took it from a circa 1990 technology perspective and automated it to be like a world class generator facility. So we put in stuff from all over the world. And that was just a great experience. You know, we did all these things and seeing how the team worked. And it was like, you know, being around people. And then I got an opportunity to go to Germany. And that was great. I live near Dusseldorf. Part of the deal was I said, look, I'll go, but I'm only going to go if you give me the time to learn a language. And so I spent so I'd kind of go to language school during the day. And then at night I would do my jobs for about 6 weeks. And then, you know, I became the plant controller or the CFO really for our generator business in Europe. And, you know, got really famous as the American guy who could speak English because, you know, a lot of times people would switch to German because they didn't know no one wanted us to know what they were saying, but they figured out really quick that I knew what they were saying. So, but that was really important to me because I said, if I don't learn the culture and the language, it's a waste of time and energy to move over here. And then as it so happened, my technical partner in Fort Payne left the company for a competitor, and the person they put in to replace him was not really being successful. And, you know, I don't think it's a glamorous story, but basically I was at the Christmas party with my team in Germany, and one of my friends and an old boss kind of called me and said, you know, we really need somebody to go run Fort Payne. And I think I said, well, I can do that. And like 3 days later, they called back and said, hey, were you serious when you said that? And I was like, yeah, I'm serious. And, you know, 3 weeks later, I was announced as the plant manager at Fort Payne at 32. And again, it was a senior manager role. So I was like, okay, well, that was always my challenge. It's like, well, now you know, I thought like if I ever made it to that level, I've, you know, achieved my goal. And, you know, now I'm like sitting there at 32, 33 as a senior manager within Siemens running a business. And then it's sort of like, you know, what do you do? And I had I'll be fair, I had no clue. I mean, it was highly technically, you know, product. It was highly engineered, running manufacturing, having to go try to talk to customers. And it was all about the people I had around me. You know, without that team there having my back, there was no chance for success.
Wow. So, how did living and working in all these different areas change your perspective or broaden your understanding of different cultures? I know Germany is different than Fort Payne, but
Mm-hmm.
it seems like it's, you know, kind of a cool experience to be able to live around a bit.
I think the biggest thing it taught me is to understand differences in people and figure out how to build bridges. You know, my family was from New York. I grew up in Florida, Long Island, and Fort Myers, Florida is a pretty different culture. And so very early on, you know, I saw those different aspects. But I would say, you know, if you live in Fort Payne, Alabama, which is a small town, and I understand why folks who live in these beautiful areas want to raise their families there for generations. I understand what it means to ensure that that business stays there. And you know, some of the folks who worked in our organization, our engineering manager, his name was Jeff Langford. He started on the shop floor and worked his way up. You know, and our HR manager, you know, had grown up in the town and she moved away and came back. And I think perspective is very different. They were just amazing folks to work with. You know, every one of the team except for me and really the plant controller sort of just stayed there, and we kind of rotated out. So, if they didn't like what the plant manager did, they would just wait us out because they knew that this was a training ground for some of the top talents in the company. So that to me, the challenge there for me was to be accepted. Like I didn't want to be seen as the guy who was just there to, get his ticket punched and to leave. And that's sort of why I went back. I moved to Germany. I sold my house and everything, thinking there's no way I'll ever come back here. Not because I didn't like it, but just because I didn't, I was on the CFO track. Mm-hmm. And it was a great 3 years. I won't say that it was easy because it wasn't. I won't say that I didn't make mistakes because I certainly did. I upset the workforce a few times, trying to do the right thing. But I think at the end of the day, we had more successes than failures. And it taught me, that you have to have a good team around you. Because if I would have tried to do that by myself, I would have failed horrifically. And if I didn't trust those folks, we would have failed. And so we had to really be a big, a very cohesive unit. And I think it allowed us to do great things. We insourced things. We lowered our lead times on our service products. We were beating the competition in places we hadn't beat them before. And that feeling was really great.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And as you mentioned, you were in a CEO-like job at a very young age, 32. So what did that experience teach you about leadership and responsibility?
A lot. I think you don't realize it until you're there. I was in at that time, Fort Payne is a great place, but it's an outpost. It's hard to get to. My boss would come once or twice a year. Nobody really came unless we messed up, to visit the plant. So we were on our own from that aspect. And there's two choices, right? You can either freeze or you got to just take charge. And so my view on it was I'll just take charge, and if decisions need to be made, I'll make the decision. If I make the wrong decision, I'll be accountable to that. And I think that's how I looked at it. That's what I had to do. I wouldn't say that it was always easy. At that time is when I also started to realize how important it was to not just internally focus in the Siemens, but actually start to look at your broader network of people and look outside for help. So I started to meet other people in the industry and start to meet other business leaders, even in Fort Payne, because we had some great companies there, and we all had the same issues. We couldn't find people with the skill sets. We had a hard time dealing with certain things. We had tornadoes. I fought to get a tornado shelter put into the factory because my employees were scared, and it was a genuine fear. It wasn't like, so it was a real thing, and so I think fighting some of those fights, and once the team saw us as the management team doing that, they really changed their attitude towards us and towards me.
Well, today you are CEO of SGT. So tell us how you ultimately landed here.
Yeah, so I did another couple general management jobs after Alabama. The last one was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the energy business started to sputter a little bit. And so as a finance guy in an engineering organization, the organization decided that they wanted to organize functionally. They didn't kick me out. But to be fair, I was like the person who was reporting to me could do my job. And I said, this is not the right thing for the company. So I started to say, okay, what's the next step? And I was contacted by Siemens USA, and they said Clay Hale is moving on, and we need somebody to come up to SGT. Would you be interested? They said it's a CFO role, and I said, well, sure. I mean, I don't know anything about SGT, but I'll go learn about it. And I met Barbara Humpton and met some of the other folks there. And I said, well, this is a great organization. Love to be part of it. I'd love to learn the DC thing. And so, a couple months went by, I didn't really hear anything. And then they said, hey, we think we really want you to take the job. And so I met the board members at that time, and they, gave the thumbs up. And then I started as a CFO. I had no idea how independent the Foci organization was. I just assumed it was a sort of like another business unit within Siemens, but we were not. We were an independent organization. And having been sort of on those outposts so much in my career, I was like, well, it's great. I can make decisions. I can do things. I can sort of have that autonomy that I enjoy. And so, we did a lot of great things with the business. We booked some big contracts. We were in the middle of divesting the business. which was funny. We were divesting a business that included a manufacturing facility to Curtis Wright, and nobody in SGT really knew about manufacturing. They kind of had stuck this factory underneath SGT, but it sort of was independent. So, like my third day in DC, a couple of the folks came to me and said, "Hey, you know about manufacturing? Have you ever done like large scale projects and moving stuff around?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they started to take me through this Wellsville topic, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I quickly inherited a non CFO job, like in my third day, um, and then and then really enjoyed it and got to meet more people in DC. Started to network and to meet people, and really started working with the board, and then of course then COVID hit, and we had to work through all that, and I learned a lot about leadership there as well. Started really to learn about how, say, the government operates, how we all the other stuff works, and so I made it really clear up front that when I started with SGT that this was a way to learn into the segment, but more than likely, after a few 3 or 4 years, probably have learned it, and then I'm going to have to maybe move on. And when Tina got her a new position with CDRF, the board came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to step in as the interim CEO?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it for a few months." But I was sort of like, "Well, it's good you got to me now," because I was thinking about what my next step is, and it's just so worked out. And I said, "Well, let's try it. You see if you like it. We'll see if we like you running the business, and we'll go from there." And I think Ann and I really, and Altman, our board chair, really, I think saw that our thoughts about the company and everything were very well aligned. And after a few months, I sort of said to them, "Okay, guys, like, seems like it's working pretty well, so I guess we're going to do this thing, right?" And they kind of looked back and said, "Yeah." And so then I knew probably after 4 months or so that it was going to become a full-time job, and we made it official October 1st, and it's just been a great experience. And again, it's sort of my career trajectory. It's not I think I'm one of those people that even though I'm young, I have gotten the jobs I've gotten based on the performance, and really stepping in and taking a stretch, where somebody took a risk on me and proving it to them. That's kind of been my trajectory so far, and it always means I'm kind of whatever word you want to use, like scrapping to the next level, or always being there. But the other piece of it is it's allowed me to learn a lot, and really, I can't say enough, and that Siemens has been an amazing place to work for me. And people ask me all the time, when I'm at these networking things, like, "I just can't believe you stayed there all these years." And I said, "Well, they never actually made me want to leave." People normally don't leave. They leave if they have a really good opportunity sometimes, but I would say even 90% of those is, well, there's always something in the back of your head. I won't, in 23 years, I definitely have had those times, but something has always been presented to me, which makes me really fulfill the mission of the company, and again, the customer, and what we do here in the GovCon sector is so amazing. It's hard to not be attracted to it. So that's the story. And of course, again, it's about the people, right? We needed stability within the company, and I really believe in our team, and understand the business. So it was really a natural fit.
I mean, and it seems like you got to do so many things within Siemens that it may have felt like new opportunities and experiences.
Absolutely.
Mhm. I also like to draw connections, and just as we were, it's easy to think about these things as you're hearing someone's story in a very condensed way, but it seems like your adaptability, I mean, is also pretty, in my opinion, key, because having to go through things at an early age that are really out of your control and roll the punches, and you don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, it seems, as you talk about your new opportunities and saying yes to things that seem very scary for someone who has not been in these roles, um, I can't help but think about the way you described your childhood, and even changing your major and shifting schools. These are changes that are pretty, I don't know, pretty impactful at an early age. And I just wonder how they impact you as an adult.
Yeah, I think I think for me, one of the things is there was, when you're told all the time about things you can't do, it makes you like when really want to do them more. So when there's a medical thing, it's kind of hard to argue with the doctors. Like, "Look, we can't have you get hit with a kidney because we don't want you to die." Okay, well, I can't really argue with that. But everything that doesn't go there, it's pretty hard for somebody to say like, well, can you go run an engineering business? Well, I mean, yes, why not? I can survive cancer. I can do these other things. I can go learn how to run a business. And I think that's a different sort of a different attitude to look at it. Is I'm when I talk, it's interesting because we at Siemens we have to talk to our top talents and talk to our young folks, and they always look at you and say, well, did you have this great elaborate career plan? And I always say no, and then you get the blank stares, like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, my career plan was when somebody was saying, hey, here's an awesome opportunity, I was like, yeah, let's go do it. And then I did it, and I made sure I understood by working with a team and, that the team was behind, that we were all together, that we understood what the goals were, and that we were honest. This is what we can do and this is what we can't do. And if we can't do it, let's get alignment with the key stakeholders and to something that we actually can do. And I think and that works whether it's your shareholders, whether it's your customer, whether it's your internal folks. It even works for me. It works at home with my wife too, right? Like you use that everywhere. And so once you develop that skill, and I won't say it works every time, but for me, that was something that I learned at a very young age. Like I said, the doctor would come and say, "We're going to take 17 vials of blood out of you this morning." Okay, well, or the chemotherapy is making you so sick, we need you to come to the hospital for it because we can't have you passing out in the middle of your house. That was literally happening to me. So when you hear it, I think it gives you some perspective. But again, that message of like, we're going to get through this. This is just the steps we have to go through. I think that really taught me a lot. But yeah, the best way to motivate me is to tell me I can't do something. Then I definitely will do it.
Mm-hmm.
And as a leader, I think at least for me, there's no better feeling in this world of seeing somebody who didn't think they could do something do it, and that's in their whether it's in their personal life or whether it's in their professional life or whatever, and I've seen helped folks achieve what they want or to get to a goal they couldn't think that they could do. I mean, for me, there's no better feeling than that. So as a leader of a large organization, we kind of do that every day. So it's I don't want to say it's like a drug, but it really makes me, it really feeds what makes me happy. So that's why I love doing my job. It's not really work. I mean, I love doing it because we're doing that and helping folks do that every day.
That's awesome. And as you had mentioned, when you were manager and moving up in those ranks, you had thought, oh, I made it. I'm here. This is what I, wanted to achieve. So I'm assuming you never really thought about the CEO path in life prior, or that would be.
No, not really. No, I mean, I never thought about it until I got that job in Fort Payne. When I came to SGT, I honestly didn't think about being the CEO. I really loved being the CFO. And I fully thought that my next role would be a CFO of a bigger company, or a bigger segment with Siemens. But now that I've become the CEO of sort of an independent entity, I'm pretty sure that's where I'll stay because I enjoy it. I really, really do. It's been extremely fulfilling. Some of the amazing things that our team has achieved this year, and that I've got to be a part of. It's really great. So I probably had this false sense, I think, when I was younger in my career, that the CEO had to always kind of be out there in the front on the stage and everything else. It's really not in my personality. And, it's sort of something that it goes back to UCF. Is when I was pretty new at UCF, I went to Disney World and kind of did this inside tour. And they always say, you go into the Magic Kingdom and there's a statue of Walt Disney with Mickey Mouse. And then if you take the background tour, they say, well, if you turn around, there's a bench, and Roy Disney is sitting on the bench. Well, Walt Disney had the dream, but Roy Disney actually made it happen, and he was kind of the business guy behind the business. Well, in my mind, for a lot of years, I viewed that Roy Disney was like the CFO and Walt is the CEO. And what I found out now is I really love being on the bench watching other people succeed, but as a CEO, I can actually do that. And that is an amazing feeling for me. And I think it also helps you really to put an ego aside and say, I when I hire somebody to be on our executive team, I want people that are smarter and better than I do. And every job I've had, I've always wanted to have 2 or 3 people working for me that can step up and take my job. And that was, when I moved on to the CEO, to have Katie, who I had hired into SGT, step up behind me and take the job, I think was a huge compliment of saying, there was people there who were as good as I am, or better, hopefully better. And that's always what I'm looking for. Not because, I want to be threatened by people, but more I want the best people I can have around me. And so that's why, that's one of the key tenets for me as a leader, and develop and pushing those people to develop all the time. I think and I think that is a piece of working for a large corporation. Sometimes folks in a smaller organization get fearful of folks leaving and moving on, that it's going to harm the business. And my view is, when you're part of a large organization, part of my job in the commercial side of Siemens was to develop people and push them into the next level. So I view that's part of my job, still today is, there's some folks that want to be here 5 or 6 years or 7 years or their whole career. And there's some folks that want to come here and learn and do a great job for us for 3 or 4 years and then move on to their next step. And we have to celebrate all of them like that. And I think that's one of the great things that I've learned about people over the years.
Wonderful. So having spent the entirety of your career with Siemens and having the experiences that you do, what would you say to the next generation then of leaders who are maybe unsure about their next move?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple things that I see to the generation that's upcoming, which is difficult, right? The broader environment is very different than it was when I started in my career. But I think the keys still remain, which is you've got to find something that you love to do. You've got to find a company and an organization that I think aligns to your value set. But you also have to realize that it's never going to be 100%. And you always have to look for the best. I mean, one of the things, when we're talking to customers in difficult situations is like, we didn't try to mess up your product. We tried to build you the most amazing thing out there. It didn't work. And this is how we're going to fix it. And I think to the generation of, I think, leaders that are up and coming is, I think our world now needs a little bit more calm and understanding. And I think that's the best thing that all of these folks that are now developing in their careers can bring when they take over for those of us who have been around for 20 plus years is, I think there's a lot more things you got to be concerned with. If I look at it, when I started, we had been on Outlook for 2 weeks. So Outlook was brand new. So put that in the back of your head. And I'm not that old, right? So if I think about the changes that they're going to see in their careers, they've got really to be open to that, I mean, if you would have told when I started with work, actually, it's a good story for this. When I was in grad school, a gentleman came in from Singular Wireless,
Wow.
and somebody asked him and said, "What is the vision for Singular Wireless?" And he said, "Well, our goal is we're going to give you this little Nokia phone at the time. We're going to give you this phone, and no matter where you go in the world, it's going to ring and you can be connected." And it's like, that is our goal. And there was people, I swear to you, that literally laughed out loud.
Oh, no.
They were like, there's no way that's ever going to happen. So think about that for a minute is, that's how technology's changed in 20 years. So I think what's going to come in 20 years is going to force us all, to have open minds.
That's hilarious. My dad, we used to always say, because we were also connected to our phones, one day your phone will be on your wrist. And my sister and I used to laugh at him. We were like, no one wants their phone on their wrist. And now we're all wearing Apple Watches.
Right. That was a cartoon when I was a kid, Dick Tracy, right? Dick Tracy had a watch on his wrist.
Oh, maybe that's where I got the idea from.
That was an old cartoon. So yeah.
Wow. It'll be really interesting to see how that changes over time. But you're right, it's happening so fast. So we got to keep up.
Absolutely. And I think the opportunities that leaders that are coming today will be greatly expanded because as we get more technology and we get more things, the world actually gets closer together.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I think your perspective is such an important one to spread within the industry. So I really appreciate you spending time with me today and opening up.
Yeah, thanks, man. It was really enjoyable to talk to you.
Did you know you can find podcast episode highlights, exclusive video interviews, and tons more Washington Exec content on our YouTube channel? Subscribe to us on YouTube to keep up with our daily content, and don't forget to share and give a thumbs up. Thanks for listening.